Hey there, databases are the foundation of everything that happens with technology, but over time, how we store and retrieve data has changed dramatically. So, today in the future of code, we talk about which database infrastructure is going to rule the world. I'm your host, Rafe Jalobos, a software engineer and senior staff instructor at LinkedIn Learning. And I'm here today with LinkedIn Learning instructors, Nikia Simpson, a software engineer who holds an MBA and a BBA in Management Information Systems from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock and has done courses for us on SQL for data analysis, career paths with SQL, and the Google Cloud platform. Hello, Nikia.
Hello,
And
good
I
to be
also
here.
have, yes, I also have Justin Jenkins, who's a full stack developer with 2 decades of experience in the backend development. He's an expert on MongoDB and SQL, and he works with PushPay in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Hello, Justin.
Hi, thanks for having
So I'm super excited. But before we get started, I want to get some things out of the way. So this is part one of a five-part series we're doing this week on the future of code. We're talking to industry experts from all walks of tech, starting with day one on databases. On day two, we're going to talk about legacy programming languages. And day three is about machine learning and data science. Day four on emerging languages. And then we end up on day five with the future of the web with my friend Morten Ryan Hendrickson. We're also taking questions from the audience. So if you have a question for the guests, go ahead and add them to the chat and we'll get to those a little bit later in the show. Now, to make this a little bit interactive, I'm getting started with a poll. So you can vote on that right now. I started the poll yesterday. We have over 100 votes for sure. I'm sure it's like 150, maybe 200 votes. The question is, which of these database approaches do you think will be the most popular in the future? Relational, document store, hybrid, or other? So let's go ahead and get started. And get started with a little bit about the past. I'm talking about SQL first because I think it was created before MongoDB all the way back in the 70s. I was doing a sort of history of full stack development course, and I was really amazed at how many things that we use today have had been created, like not just in the 70s, but all the way back to like the 50s and 40s. So, Nikia, it's been developed since the 70s by IBM, and since then it's continued to evolve, and it's still like probably the most popular platform. To what do you attribute its resilience?
Right, the relational database model has really stood the test of time, right? And for a good reason. With it, we're able to structure out data in a way that best suits each individual organization. And we create these unique entities and we store them in tables, and we can really drive some incredible insights from very complex relationships between them. Also, we're able to enforce some business logic and rules within the database itself outside of applications such as our web applications or our software. So the relational model keeps this information structured and it helps drive data integrity. It also helps it for the data to be consistent, and it's a great solution for large transactional databases, for example, e-commerce or banking solutions, which is really why it's been around for such a long time and it's so widely used.
Wow, so I'm pretty amazed because I used to use SQL at the very beginning of my career, and we all know that I believe Facebook was actually built with SQL. But there is sort of a newer kid on the block, and that is all this concept of database or document stores and MongoDB that was created in 2007. It quickly really rose to become the premier document store database. It even got its own sort of moniker for the way that people combine technology. So what are some of the advantages, Justin, of that approach?
Yeah, and I'm glad you described it as a document database because earlier on it was referred to as like a schemaless database, but it's not really schemaless. It's just the schema, in other words, like the structure of your data is very flexible. Um, and obviously being new doesn't necessarily mean better. Maybe with databases, especially, you might not want the cutting edge stuff. You want things that have really been tested for time. But now a decade and a half or so in, I think Mongo has had time to mature. And so now some of the like core advantages, like this document model, which lets you store things using a JSON-like format. So a lot of the web and JavaScript, uses JSON things, and so being able to do things like store arrays and objects and things like that natively, and then query them with a querying language that works a lot like JavaScript, just flows a lot better, I think, with kind of more modern applications. And SQL wasn't really designed for the web, and that's not really a knock on it. It just wasn't.
Mm.
And so as a result, I think you find a lot of things sitting on top of your database, like an ORM or maybe
Hmm.
something more structured like a store procedure. But it putting a lot of things between your database and your code. So I find a lot of times working with documents means you don't have to do that as much. That said, a lot of databases are accepting some of this kind of idea of storing JSON and stuff. So I think it will be interesting where the future goes on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that SQL is something that paired extremely well with PHP, and that's maybe a little bit of why it became so dominant so quickly. It was just like a perfect parent. It got the moniker of the LAMP sort of system, or the LAMP sort of stack, and it's super awesome. The query language, I think, is kind of what made it get to the top of other approaches at the time, and it paired so well. But one of the maybe weaknesses, or one of the things that didn't pair so well, especially when people started to move to JavaScript, was that fact that ingesting that into like a front end application was a little difficult. Where something like a document store with kind of a JSON, sort of document format, was a lot easier to sort of pull in. So, since we asked this of everybody else, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the question. What do you think about the future, like say 10, 20 years from now? Do you think we're going to have something that is a hybrid? Do you think SQL's still going to be around? What do you guys think about the future of these two technologies?
Well, I definitely believe that in the future we'll see more of a hybrid of both solutions or an integration of both for different purposes within the organization.
Hmm.
And just as Justin mentioned, we see a little bit of that now within database systems like PostgreSQL, where we have the ability to store data in JSON columns, and similar to document store, with the ability to also add that constraints and the validation like we do in the SQL schema. So you'll also see some of that column store solutions in like Google's BigQuery in their serverless data warehouse, where we're also able to store JSON columns, JSON data within the column. So like with the ease of the scalability of document store, and the relational the data warehouse is really key for the highly complex querying and data modeling that we need to do in more data analysis and data science. And I think that's really going to come to play as we move more into AI, and in supervised learning, where we have to know more about an indication of the information we need to do to train these models. We need to know more about those complex relationships within our data. So, and then we could also do the same thing for more unstructured data as well when we go into more deep learning and AI.
What about you, Justin?
Yeah, I think I have a similar outlook on it. The I wouldn't quite answer hybrid because I think it's going to be a hybrid of databases. I think much like kind of APIs, like we don't use one API. We use a lot of different APIs. They work differently. Some might
Hmm.
use just a straight HTTP thing. They might use GraphQL. Or they might use all kinds of different formats. Um, but they have different strengths, and I think there's definitely cases where something really on the simple end, like DynamoDB, could be used a lot, but you're going to use SQL to maybe make a data store, uh, or you might be using, for a lot of quick reads, you might want something that's like the document object model, or if you're gathering a lot of data, you're not quite sure how to structure it yet. So I think it will be really important for developers in the future to understand both those concepts. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, ruling the world. I don't know. I think ruling the world will end up being some diversity,
That's it.
but I think it's
Exactly.
also really important to know both of these and really understand like the strengths of both.
Yeah, those are really good points. I wonder how, I haven't really been heavily kind of moving with the back end of the web so much. I primarily have been using something like Firebase, which is kind of a document store, and they've added this layer, this kind of query layer. So, do you think something like MongoDB that's been around, it's kind of the older sort of the document store? Do you think it's made a lot of adjustments? I don't really know kind of the newer things that are happening with that sort of approach.
Yeah, I'd say over the course of time, the a lot of things have been added. So like the first kind of real push for it was around just making simpler reads and writes. So it's doing a lot of things in memory.
Mm,
Could handle way more things that might bring down a SQL Server, frankly, with the number of
hmm
connections and operations. Um, but it was lacking a lot of things. Like since it was doing those things in memory, if something crashed, that might be a big problem because you might just lost a lot of data. So a thing that had to get added over time was a lot more resiliency and technologies to make it more stable. Um, so and things like security, like there wasn't even really a user
mm,
system initially, but now there's a whole user system. There's authentication, there's encryption, there's document level encryption, database level encryption. Lots of those things that kind of had to get added on top to make it a little more on par with the decades of stuff SQL's been able to have. Um, so there's been a lot of that. And then just a continual thing, like a big push over the last number of years was a thing
hmm
called the aggregation framework. And that is to make really kind of complex query aggregation.
hmm
So instead of writing a big giant SQL query, you actually kind of write steps that you want to process the data.
Mhm.
And so that's a big change as well.
That's really interesting. Now, you did mention something about GraphQL. Has that had an impact on document store type databases?
To some extent, I think where where that's had a difference is starting to think of your data a little more like data that can kind of live like an object as opposed to like a set or in rows and columns. And I think that's starting to change how people think about querying something.
Mhm.
And that's something a document database has had for a long time, obviously. But it's definitely a different point of view because, especially like a relational database, you're thinking a lot about how do I normalize and denormalize data, right? How do I like split it up so I can reuse it multiple places? And you almost have to think the inverse a lot of times. You have to think like an example I like to say is, in a relational database, you might have a teams table and a players table, and you join them together to compose the team. Whereas in a document database, you may just have a teams document, and it has a array of objects inside it. That's the players.
Mm.
So it's just a very different thought process.
So, Nikia, for you, when would you say that something like a document store type database would not be the right thing to use? Like, when do you think like that the relational model and something like SQL is just clearly, an instance where it would be superior?
Well, I think the biggest advantage with the relational model is structure and being
hmm
able to hold on to some data integrity with the business rules and the logic built in within the database. I'll say like when I first learned about information systems in college, it was really cool to kind of draw out all these different entities and we would look at it on the board and it's be all these complex relationships. You look at it one to one and one to many and many to many relationships and how these very large systems could are related to one another and you how a change in one area can dramatically affect everything else and you could either make these really great insights or create a lot of chaos with all of these joints But through the process, like exactly what Justin said, with the process of being able to normalize data to something very specific, or denormalize to have these very large tables where you may have some more redundancy, but it requires a little less joins. I think there's a balance between storage and efficiency, but we can also improve performance by indexing our columns and our tables, and to make our queries a little faster. But all in all, I think the relational model is has the advantage for when it comes to really complex queries and lots of transactions that you use within the relational model.
Yeah, that was really a revolutionary kind of introduction from SQL. And in my, I don't know, you probably know this, but in my history of full stack development course, one of the things I discovered is that MySQL was actually named after the gentleman who invented his daughter, whose name was My. What? It's like the most interesting thing I learned. And then when I think Oracle acquired I think Sun Microsystems, and they made a fork of the database, and they called it MariaDB now, I guess, and so that's actually named after his last daughter. So the most interesting piece of trivia that I that I learned from that. So what sort of things? I think you talked a lot about the things that SQL is doing. If you were to approach a very large project, say with a, maybe more of a front end, would you still reach it? Do you think SQL is still something that combines well with something like a front end type of library, or how do you make that kind of adjustment to make it friendly to something like a front end tool?
For we still have to incorporate like a middle layer in order to get in contact with our database. In the past, I've had instances where we do a .NET framework where we create data like a data source directly to a database, but a lot now is through APIs, which we'll create some type of middle layer between our relational database and our code. But but yeah, I think that's the best way it is from a security standpoint as well, to protect your database and your users.
Super cool. So what are some of the cool new things, kind of new approaches that you guys are most excited about? Like, there's a lot of sort of new work being done in databases. There's one called Supabase that just came out, and there's some other ones. I asked in the polls, and somebody mentioned stuff that I'd never heard of. So is there any new things that you guys are super excited about? And we can start with Justin, I guess.
Sure. Well, I think some of the things I'm at least excited about with MongoDB are actually terribly boring but terribly important. When Mongo, as I kind of referenced before, when MongoDB first came out, it wasn't terribly resilient. It was super fast, but you could lose data, especially if you didn't follow like some of the things they were asking you to do, like set up replication and things like that. So if one server crashed, there'd be a copy somewhere else. But a lot of people were like, we don't really need to do that. And then they ran into a giant problem. There also were no transactions when it first came out. There's no, if you're kind of a database geek, there's no ACID compliance. And there was no encryption stuff, like I mentioned before. So at this point, MongoDB has all those, and that's something that I think really starts to make it really to be able to compete. Like I said, I still think having both can have their own strengths. You could have them both together. I've worked in a number of organizations, and we've had both.
Wow. So together, I had never really heard them working with one another. That's interesting.
Definitely. Like made whole interesting things even too, where like we were getting a lot of statistics and analytics, and we were bringing them first in MongoDB and then kind of massaging them over the course of time, and using some programs to kind of digest the data, and then we put the final version in SQL so we could better query it later.
And I could have used this.
Part of that, yeah. So the great advantage of that was we could constantly change the input, what we were taking in, and we could wait till later to actually process it to what you might call like eventual consistency. And so then we didn't have the danger of pushing out change, like, oh, we need to store this new bit of data. We don't have to update all our tables and
Hmm.
push out a new code release. We could just start tracking that new field because the flexibility of the document model. But in the end, then we transferred it again over to SQL, so we could kind of have a standardized like data lake where we could then query it with a programming language maybe people were more used to. So I think you can use both of them together really awesomely.
What
That's how
that,
we're going to do it.
I know that I'm a nerd because I'm finding, I don't know why you said it was boring. That's the most incredible thing I've ever heard. That you can actually use both in a way that it makes sense. That's just crazy. So Nikia, what sort of things are you excited about, like in the database? Don't worry about it sounding boring. I'm gonna get excited over it. You're in the right audience. Like,
This
come on,
sounds
this
like
is like cool stuff.
actually, I go to I'm also in school, and one of the things I study in school is artificial intelligence. So I'm really excited about using SQL with machine learning, and I actually had a chance to teach a little bit about that in the career paths for SQL course, which was fun. So in the past, we've always used SQL just for like the data analysis portion, and then we do the analysis and we get the information to our data scientists, and they create the models and they do everything within SAS or Python. But now you see, like in Google's BigQuery, there's this option to be able to create your own models within the SQL itself. It's really cool to bring those two technologies together and see how we can merge that SQL, the data analysis world, into data science too. I think artificial intelligence is fun.
That is really cool. Like, everybody's so interested in artificial intelligence, but they don't I don't visualize that as having some sort of database. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what that's stored in, but it's got to be a
Mhm.
database, right? So, but I just don't exactly know how that would work. So that's pretty interesting. And there's, I imagine, tools that are made for that sort of kind of preparation and interaction, right? Because those queries that
Right.
people make with the tools like, oh, the open AI tools, they're very sort of English like, they're almost SQL like, and that's the nice thing about
Hmm.
SQL. So is that what you mean? Like, how do you,
Yes.
what are they using to convert like that
Hmm.
plain English? It's not even like SQL English. It's like, get me an elephant, a pink elephant riding a horse, with eating a pie or something, and like it figures it out. So,
Yeah, well, within that whole tool within BigQuery, it's right. It's like right within the SQL language itself. So you can create your
what?
SQL, you can create your queries, and then you can create and then they have their own query language where you can create like a linear or a classification model right within the query itself. So it's really cool.
So do you see, I mean, do you see sort of the query language becoming like more and more natural like in the future? Is that something that is perhaps something people are thinking about?
Oh, more natural than it like is now, just with the with
Yeah, like
this
OpenAI,
will
give me
very.
find me all the horses like in the last week who have, gotten third
Oh
place.
yeah.
Why am I even, there's not even that many horse races. I don't even know what I'm talking about, but like something like that. Like I think machines are getting
Yeah.
better at just like understanding, you just not, table this, left join this, get
Hmm.
this. Like, I think something cool would be maybe like a more natural query type of approach.
I I think, yeah, like and that's where my kind of thought around there's gonna be a lot of different databases for different purposes. I think there'll be some programming language or something in between, but it will then translate that over to a query of some sort. So I think it'll be some obfuscation more likely than the actual query languages
Hmm.
changing.
Hmm.
But there's like a fairly, again, nerdy exciting thing that MongoDB introduced in a newer version was a thing called time series data. So it's a way to MongoDB stores these documents in a thing called a collection. So it's a little bit like a table, but since there's not a
Hmm.
strict schema of what rows, or rather what columns you can have,
Cool.
it's just called a collection. And, and this special collection will like pivot kind of around a specific piece of data. So you can imagine if you have like a temperature sensor and you're taking measurements at a very high like level, and then you have 1,000 of those temperature sensors. It structures your data in a way that you can then query it really fast to like find over a series of time where like changes happen.
Hmm.
Like
Wow.
stock data might be another interesting correlation. Like you can say, I want the stock price at this moment and also these 5 other stocks, and I want to store that together. So I can later do some really cool like data analysis on that. Whereas that would be, you could store all that currently, but it's a lot more trouble because then you have to bring that back all together later. So this lets you kind of do that all at one time.
Wow, that I'm so geeked out that I better slow down and continue with my previously thought of things, but it's very exciting to me. So, Nikia, you did a course on career paths with SQL, but this question is really for both of
Mhm.
you. What does the job market look like, especially we're in really tough times where people are getting laid off. So, what does the job market look like for somebody maybe more in the back end who is kind of really is familiar
Mhm.
with databases? So, Nikia, go
Well,
ahead.
I think, oh yeah, no problem. So I think that most companies will still use that relational model. It's pretty much everywhere.
Hmm.
It's definitely a great skill to have, not only for software development, but it's a core skill for data science and analysis as well. And it's used, I would like to say, for people that are looking to be in IT right now and maybe a little bit, apprehensive because of what they see in the news. These are not, it's not just for big tech. I mean, you could use these skills in everything from finance to healthcare to small businesses to startups. I don't, we sometimes we just think of a tech job as with the bigger tech firms, but I worked for a university for a very long time, and then I worked for
Hmm.
a marketing firm for a very long time. So just think about all the different ways that you can apply these same skills in the different areas, not just from software development, but data analysis, data engineers, data science too. And also, if you compare SQL with like Python or R, you're set. You're just you're highly marketable. You don't think you have to worry about anything. So, but yeah, it's an
Nice.
incredible skill to have, and yeah, for sure.
What about in the document store kind of NoSQL world? Is that still something that is super kind of valuable and looked after, Justin?
Yeah, I think it's definitely still a developing thing where people are learning about it, learning maybe where they could fit that in their um, organization ecosystem, kind of. And I think like I said before, I think it's really important to know relational databases and how they work because it's such a core concept. And I think where something like the document model comes in is thinking like, okay, this area really isn't performing great and it's really kind of a bottleneck, but we don't necessarily want to throw away SQL, but how could we use this for maybe this rapidly changing application or maybe even prototyping an application. Like we can use this first to kind of feel it out and get to know like what we really need. And
Okay.
then maybe in the back end, like I was saying, the back end,
Ah,
maybe you
it's like a
still
secret
want
club.
SQL no matter what. Yeah. But that's not to say you couldn't use it like on the front end or anything like that. I just think there's different use cases for both.
So
And I
good
think
opportunities
it's
all
important to
around. I
learn it.
really,
Yeah.
I really did like the Nikia mention. R, Python, SQL. You've got it made. Pick up some MongoDB. There's probably lots of jobs still out there, for people looking for, maybe it's a smaller kind of market for Mongo because it does seem to be a little bit smaller. But say if somebody was thinking about maybe making a career switch or they're thinking about going to school and they really like the back end, what sort of things do you think they should explore? Like what's a good maybe first step you dip your feet into to see if you really love this stuff? Because I'm geeking out here, even though I'm not a back end person. But what kind of things do you guys recommend? Justin, what would you do today if you
Yeah,
were
for
if you were
sure.
going to school? Take that class on
I
R?
was just
Like it's not a pirate class, you would have to say, you know.
yeah, yeah. I think again, I think the fundamentals of what a relational database is, it's just is super important. Even though I think Mongo's awesome, but I think where that kind of shifts, it's almost like sometimes they tell kids when they're learning art or learning to play music, like you should
Hmm.
learn the basics and you should learn the core of stuff
Mhm.
before you start kind of going out there and doing something a little crazier. Um, it's not a perfect analogy, but I do think that's
That's
where the
good.
MongoDB thing starts getting interesting to me. It's like, oh, okay, like for this interesting use case, like how could we use a document model or something a little more like
So a good place would be
different.
maybe something like, here's an overview of what the databases are, and then maybe start with something like, MySQL or SQL or MariaDB or whatever it is. Would that be kind of accurate, Nikia? That's like a good plan maybe for somebody.
Yeah, I would. When we talk about like in school versus just like learning on your own or kind of as you go, I mean, in school you're going to learn all like your fundamentals, and you'll learn a lot about the theories behind different models, the history behind it,
Mhm.
different systems, things like that, which are important. So I don't want to discourage anybody from going to school and get a formal education of those things. But there's also lots of really good opportunities just to learn, like free code. Of course, I'm going to plug in LinkedIn Learning.
Why not? Yeah. No, but there are some really good
But
like I think we have a whole
there's
series
free
called the
resources.
foundations, like the foundations of
Uh-huh.
databases. That's what I was thinking when you were mentioning like the
Yeah.
foundations. We actually have a course like that, and then we have like these learning paths that kind of, okay, you want to
Mhm.
learn databases, start here, and they kind of give you a structure kind of way. But yeah, really, really good stuff. Okay, we have gotten quite a few really good questions, so I'm going to switch things up a little bit and just go to the Q&A so we can answer some of these. And let's see, there's a bunch of really tough ones. First of all, somebody did say that that they loved a PHP elephant. I don't know what they're talking about, but it's Justin. I see. So somebody really loved the plush elephant in the background. Nikia, you gotta, up your game, get some bigger elephant or something. I don't know. Let's see. Somebody said the onboarding process sometimes takes 2 weeks to do before starting your dev job. I have it to install either the I don't know, video tutorials from the same company. Okay, hold on. I didn't. That's not one that I had on my list. Let's see. So, okay, so somebody mentioned GraphQL. Actually, let me close this one out. So he said, I think that GraphQL is not ready for the high load yet. What do you guys think about that? Hmm. I think it wasn't GraphQL like the hottest thing, and then it's been having like a little bit of a struggle. I think, right?
I
I didn't
think
use it as much.
I mean, go
Go ahead, Nikia.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say I haven't used GraphQL as much, right? I mean, I know the basics of it. I've used it for a couple of side projects, but not too much. All I know as much is like it. You store your entities in nodes, and then your relationships are kind of like an edges, kind of similar like a graph structure. But um, but no, I haven't had much experience in using it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it again comes back to this like use case things.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would not. I'm not an expert on it, but I would not put like GraphQL endpoint thing as like my main way to interact with a database
Hmm.
for an application. I think it's much more useful like for inside an API code talking to another API type of stuff than like a front end that's hitting a back end of GraphQL. Like yeah, I don't think it's there yet. I'm not sure it's really the use case for it either.
All right. So we have a couple of questions on blockchain databases. I don't know if you guys have heard anything about those. So the question is blockchain databases. Do you guys heard anything about it? I mean, like Web3, Web5, everybody's like both excited, terrified, and also apprehensive about some of these things. But have you guys heard of these blockchain databases?
Heard of it, yeah. I think I don't know what exact kind being referenced there, but
Yeah.
I think the idea of your data integrity being able to be verified by something else is kind of the main idea there.
Yeah, I have no idea. And there's even a question that I'm not doesn't like I'm not that deep into the backend, so I don't know if this is like a good question. But any thoughts about the future of parallel queries to SQL DB in context of multi-threading programming? I don't know. Like, there's a lot of words in there that are Greek to me, but maybe one of you guys could sort of cover this. Hmm, interesting.
I guess
Parallel. Yeah, go
it,
ahead. Sorry.
probably. probably in reference to maybe some very large queries. If you're trying to
Mm,
query something that in like a parallel query across like some multi-threading, I mean, I guess there's some issues with that in distributed solutions where you may
hmm
have to do something whether some on a larger scale with some big data that I don't really know how to answer that one. That's a
Yeah,
tough one.
I don't even
I think
know
that
that's like an actual question. Any thoughts out of the future of parallel
yeah.
queries to SQL DB in context of multi, like, so you have, I guess multiple things making the queries. I mean, this is almost like something that you might, I don't know, you might do some, use something like GraphQL for when you got to query like a whole bunch of stuff at once and throw everything on the screen. And not that I know what I'm talking about, but multi-threading, I guess, like the way that like a front end can pull like multiple pieces of data. But I don't know, that was a little bit
So,
too complicated for me. I don't know if Justin, you have anything to add.
well, I guess I was saying like almost the inverse of stuff is what ends up interesting me. So there's like a concept in MongoDB called charting, and it's taking pieces of your data and spreading it across multiple servers. So not copies on multiple servers, but actually saying like, say you had uh, a a bunch of recipes all ordered A to Z. It might put A through F on one server and G through whatever on another server, and it kind of intelligently balances out based on how often those things are accessed, like where those things live. So you're
Mhm.
spreading the load across multiple servers kind of automatically for you.
Hmm.
So you're not having to constantly shift around things or upgrade a server here or having one monolithic server. You can kind of spread out. Was it horizontally, vertically? I always forget it. But instead of scaling up, you can scale out. So it's dealing with maybe a little bit of the heart of that question, which is when you have a lot more things hitting the database and a lot more queries happening at
Mhm.
once.
That's super interesting. Oh, and somebody, I think this is a question for Justin as well. Mentioning the tools to handling the conversation from Mongo to SQL. Like any mention of like tools that you've used kind of manage that conversion that you were talking about?
Yeah, there's some free web-based things where you can literally paste in a SQL query and it'll try to convert it to
That is so
the
interesting.
query API, as they like to call it. They don't like to call it a query language. Um, but in fact, I think even I think there's kind of a beta alpha thing that you can sort of write SQL that's in kind of testing. I don't know much about it yet for MongoDB. That will be interesting to see how they handle that and what they do there. um, but a lot of times you might be a little out of luck because you're going to end up structuring your data very differently. So you're probably going to have to learn. Like you could use those tools to kind of get you over the hump of like I should generally use this to do this or that, but probably you're just going to have to learn it. You can take my course to learn some bit.
There you go.
Introduction to MongoDB.
And well played, my friend. Well played. All right, so one more thing. Ronnie says that he loves Nikia's course. Somehow solid SQL is
Okay.
always a career boosting skill. Yeah, when I saw the joins course, I was like, oh, I just want to take that just to take me back to my days of triple left joins and such. Just to reminisce on the good old days. And then what about, so somebody, this is an interesting question. Sylvain Breton saying, what about 11T serverless base for greater performance? Isn't best avoiding database in and out of Exchange? What about this concept of like pre-rendering everything, caching, like some of maybe stored queries or the serverless quote
Mhm.
unquote thing that people are talking about? What are your thoughts on that? Let's start with, I guess, Justin first, because it seems to be maybe something for him. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, and things like SQL servers, SQL Server itself, Microsoft SQL Server, I mean, MySQL, a lot of these things will have a concept of trying to store in memory the queries that happen the most often, and that's definitely a thing. In a similar way, MongoDB will do that. In fact, MongoDB will basically just keep loading stuff into memory and do kind of a least used out first type of thing and just use as much memory as possible. Um, and So, but again, when you say like database in and outs, less of them, I mean, that's going to depend on your application. I mean, maybe you
Yeah.
have a super heavy read application, maybe you have a super heavy write, maybe it's both. So
Yeah,
it's
that
hard to
whole
really
concept
answer
of
that generally.
storing queries that was not around when I was doing my thing. So what about you, Nikia? Thoughts on serverless type of applications?
Oh, I don't know about. Yeah, I mean, there's opportunity there to store some things, within um, a memory. I was thinking on the lines of, how when we have in cloud environments, we can have oh gosh, I'm a loss for words right now, but we can serve information that's like, again, the most requested from a document that may not even be in a database. It could be just in like
Sort of
a
like a
static
cache
file
and
that we
stuff,
can just
right?
right, exactly, to serve for higher latency, so that we don't have
Hmm.
to continuously drive to our database. Also, there's opportunities where we can have, it's like a read-only database, or we're not always, where we have the information that we just want to distribute out, as opposed to our database that we actually write to. So that may be opportunities to create some more efficiencies within our database without having to hit our main database all the time.
Super cool. So I think that's enough serious stuff. Let's go into something fun. And that is something that I call the random access. This is going to be a lot of fun. These are three questions that my guests have no idea what they are. So they don't, I didn't ask them to do any studying, all, and the very hard, very difficult, challenging questions. If you guys want to participate, go ahead and add them in the chat. I think they'll be a lot of fun. There is no right or wrong answer, just pretty much opinions, and none of the opinions are right or wrong either. So let's go to the random access with question one. C3PO is famous for knowing 6 million forms of communications. When Babu Freak helped him access the Sith language by overriding security protocols, which security method would have been hardest to overcome? And so I'm gonna go to Nikia because she's laughing about this question. She remembers this in episode 9. I'm very proud of you, Nikia. So what do you think? What was that security
Oh,
method? Like Babu
what's
Freak is just like
hardest?
hacking with the hardware, I think. So do you remember this, by the way?
Oh, no. I'm just thinking, what is, it's gotta be, it's either gotta be two-factor authentication or a token. It's
All right.
super
So
time
you're going
sensitive.
with 2FA or physical token. What about you? What about you, Justin? What do you think? Do you remember this movie, by the way?
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm recalling that. He's a little mini guy, right?
Yeah. It's like a little mini Muppet, like
Uh,
a new.
yeah,
We call that a marketing opportunity, not quite to the level
yeah, right?
of Baby Yoda,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
a
because
product
Dark Throne
marketing
Thursday is
opportunity.
backwards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. That's right. There's Baby Yoda back there. Yeah.
I
Didn't
was,
make your shelf, but he was very cute. I think he's actually
yeah, he's so small, he
I
can't
saw
fit.
him on The
He's
Mandalorian, I think. If you looked at the preview for The Mandalorian, I think Babu Freak is in there. So anyway, sorry. So what's your
uh,
answer to this?
my mind was also going to those two, but I will switch it up and say email because who's going to have access to email and in the stronger future? And
That's right.
they're gonna have to bring up a old tablet or
Yeah,
maybe
that's it.
emails in the future. I don't know how that works. Like,
That's right.
so I'm
In
going
the
with
future,
email.
you're right. It might be like more secure to actually like use a fax machine. Like, no, there's only two of them in existence, like in the universe. So you're right. Maybe some of the old methods would be better. All right, that's a great answer to question one. I forgot what question two was, but here it goes. All right. Skynet from the Terminator films became self aware on August 4th, 1997. Assuming it was programmed with SQL or a document store, what would be the best way to take it down? So if you were like, I always thought the Terminator series, why are they bothering trying to fight the machines? There should be like a group of hackers in some sort of like room with like unlimited pizza, and they would be the best way to defeat Skynet, right? Like, why are they bothering with like motorcycles? I guess it makes a better movie, they say, right? So how would you take it down? Any one of these, or you can think of your own either. Let's see. I think Nikia started first, so I'm going to give it to Justin first.
Okay.
Well, let's see. like a like a distributed, like a DDoS. Probably you
Yeah.
would think they'd have a lot they could handle. They could scale. Uh,
Bandwidth, yeah.
phishing, phishing. They're probably just gonna ignore you. Cross-site script. I'd have to go with SQL injection, mostly more because, and this isn't a diss on SQL, but it's something you should know about. You should understand it and make sure you're not vulnerable to it. And I'm thinking that they are so full of themselves they did not think about SQL injection.
Do you think like I feel like that would have been also a good like back end like programmers will only always leave like a backdoor available to them. So I feel like SQL injection would be maybe the backdoor that they might use. What do you think, Nikia? I'm
Yeah,
glad,
like
Nikia.
just
I'm
get
like so
away.
happy that you're laughing at my dumb questions because they are ridiculous. Sorry.
Delete, star, no,
Yeah. The lead
delete
star,
from
drop table. Yeah, drop.
schema, drop table,
There you go.
truncate.
There you go. All right, last question.
You
Let's
ever
see
see
what
the
this one is.
comic where they were like, why'd you name your kid like drop tables? And
Yeah,
they get a call from the school because they dropped the database.
there you go. All right, last one. Let's see. In The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, you can see some legitimate uses of SQL to research murders. If that movie were updated for today's audience, which language would you use? And the options are still SQL, Cosmo DB, Supabase, DynamoDB, Firebase, or something else. And you guys can fill in what you think. Like the most modern, like for today's, what would you go with? And it doesn't have to be anyone in here. So I think we did Justin last time, so I'm gonna pass it on to Nikia first.
I'm gonna go with SQL.
You're
I'm
gonna
still gonna
go.
go with SQL.
All right.
I'm
Did you
going
see that?
basic.
Did you see
Yes,
that movie, by the way? The
the
girl with
girl.
the.
No, I don't think I've heard of it, but I don't think I've seen it before. That
See,
man, it's best for research for everything.
so yeah, there's actually some solid use of SQL, and that's really interesting because when I worked in the news department, that's what we used. And actually, that was like a data science. You were talking about the different data science jobs. That was a data science job before that
Mm.
was like a title. Just that they would go into like all
Uh-huh.
these government databases and they would ask questions and they would do the research and pull all these things. What about you, Justin? What do you think? Any of these, or you would go with something
Uh,
else?
let's see.
What
Yeah, I mean
looks the
SQL. I
best? What do
think
you
would
think?
give
Like,
the.
yeah.
I think for a TV show though, possibly a good like MongoDB thing might be interesting because it'll look like a bunch of gibberish because it'll all be like in JavaScript. But it reminded me a little of the show like 24 where they'd be like 10 minutes in the show they're like, oh, we could fix this, we have to open up a port on the firewall, and then for like 45 minutes they're opening a port on the firewall, which is like, it's like you had the right terms but it makes no sense when you're using it. So I don't know, just make me think of that.
I agree with you. I think like it's not just that it's not just important for it to be effective. I think it's got to look good on camera, and nothing looks more like programming. Like SQL is just like
Like a
not English
terminal.
enough. Yeah, if you made it like open AI, then it would just be get me a tomato. That's in every crime scene or whatever. But I feel like if you wanted it to look a little more computerate, I think SQL is always good. So let's see. People are smiling about our choices, which is always great. This is a great talk. Don't name your kid Bobby Drop Tables. So some people said do some code on GitHub, of course. Yes, that's great. And then people are voting on SQL injection as one of the
Mhm.
methods. So that's pretty cool. All right. So uh, just I think now we go to just reminding people that GitHub Universe, although it was over last week, you can still go find it. There's some fantastic talks. There's a talk called I think it's like 10 years of GitHub. They give you a lot of stats on like which languages over time have been more and more popular. TypeScript is really growing. Ruby, which funnily enough is what GitHub is programmed in, is actually like on the way down. So it's like interesting to see those kind of stats from the people that have like all that data available to them. And let's see. Yeah, so I wanted to point you to the 50 different courses that we have available. So there's actually 50 courses from like 30 authors in multiple programming languages. Like we have Go here, React, Python, Java, JavaScript, and these are all available for free at this URL that you see on screen. So you can go check it out and you can find Nikia's course in there and give it some love and make sure if you enjoy joints like I do, make sure you check out her course, which is Practice It SQL Joins. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in actually building this? Because it was made with code spaces, so it meant that you like didn't, I don't know, how exactly did you do it? Do you do a SQL join like on a code space?
Oh, this is a really fun course to make because one of the top questions that I've gotten from learners that has courses is that we really want to interact with the database. How can we do that? And so one of the challenges with the code spaces was to create the database itself. So we had to create the scripts to actually move files into a SQLite database. And so our learners get to do something really interesting is that they only get to do the SQL, they get to practice SQL, but they also learn a little bit about GitHub. They learn a little bit about shell scripting. They learn a little bit about diagrams. And so you get not just the SQL joins, but a variety of things at the same time. So it was a really fun course to create. And those challenges with just creating the database itself was at first was a little bit of a challenge since we don't have a centralized database, but once we got around that and being able to load that into something that each user can use for themselves and have a chance to play around with it and not break anything, so you don't have to be scared to break it because it's your own environment. I think it's really good. It's really cool.
Super cool. So somebody says that she is going to do your class. I just finished my DA Google certification. Must be a database thing. In this class. Yeah, I mean, honestly, all our teachers are fantastic. And I peeked at Nikia's course and I know it's good. So same thing for Justin, although Justin doesn't have a code space course right now. There's one on the way. So that should be coming out soon. Your latest course was on an introduction to MongoDB. So talk about a little bit about this course and maybe some of the experiences you had working with code spaces.
Yeah, it was really awesome. What we ended up doing is taking about a quarter of this introduction course and filming it and using CodeSpace, which was really great. Kind of like Nikia was saying, we were able to make it so that a database loads. You can do this in a browser. It loads a database for you, loads all the example data in for you, and you can start going and querying right away and kind of seeing the data without you messing up anything on your machine or anything like that. And additionally, we re-recorded the sections that interact with different programming languages in MongoDB. So we have Node, Go, Python, PHP, and you can
Wow.
go through those and actually run them right in the code space. You can edit the code files, you can press the little button, and boom, your program runs. And you can see it right there. You don't have to install drivers locally or anything like that. And it's just really exciting because instead of maybe picking one of those videos for a programming language you were kind of familiar with, you could just watch all of them and kind of play along. And that was something that was just not possible before. So it's
Well,
really,
that
really
sounds
cool.
really, really awesome. I can't
Yeah.
wait to see that course. I mean, that ability for us to kind of release 50 courses at a time, that's really cool. 50 courses. And we really have been working in partnership with GitHub over the last year. So one last thing is just asking you to follow each one of us on LinkedIn. Those are the links to our individual pages. So, make sure you follow the hosts where you can learn more about all their courses and definitely keep up with what they're doing. And then finally, don't forget to go to GitHub Universe and check out the offerings there. And then tomorrow, I'm doing another session where we answer the question of legacy languages. Will those languages survive in the future? And we're talking with Catherine Hodge and Crystal Lindley. That's at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific. Thank you so much for watching. And let's see, there's actually somebody did correct me, or at least told me what DA was, data analytics. I should have guessed that. But and some people are saying they love LinkedIn Learning. So do I. Thank you so much for being members and for just helping us do this. I think like one of the first things that I learned about LinkedIn and LinkedIn Learning was that we hire people that love teaching. That's kind of our North Star, I think. The teaching is more important because I've been to like these conferences where the people that wrote X, Y, and Z, but when they try to explain something, they almost forgot what it was like not to know something. So it's always been super important to get people that like they have the knowledge, but they can also sort of communicate it in a very effective manner. That's really something that we look for. And every time I see
Yeah, I
somebody's
heard like
course, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I heard like 1 minute of Nikia's like first course, and I was like, I think I'm gonna like her because it was
I
just
know.
very relatable and just like, what
Yeah,
does this
great
even mean?
voice too, very friendly. Yeah, that's
Good.
that's one thing from the Linda days that I remember that they always told us. It's like, listen, two things you can do. Number one, pretend that you're teaching yourself like before you know it. And second, pretend that you're talking to a friend. When you're talking to somebody, pretend that it's just like a friend that you're trying to help. And
Absolutely.
that's how you should approach it. And I think that you can see the heart of the lady who started, the company originally, Linda, still in a lot of the stuff that we do. So thank you so much, guys, for hanging out with me, making me get excited about databases again. I didn't know that that was
Good.
possible. There's a little sort of a fire in me still burning, so I'm glad I still have
Awesome.
I love SQL. It did so much to me. So good talking to you, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.